Hello, welcome. AP World History. Me, Jason, you. I don't know, but still, hello. Welcome to class number 9 of AP World History. This is class 9 of the lecture. We are going to today continue with Greece, finish it and see how far we can get into chapter 11, which is Rome. I don't know. But for right now, let me answer the questions I gave you at the end of last class. First one, in what ways did trade and manufacturing affect the caste system? Here, very simple. What you have to know is, as the economy grew and as more and more jobs became part of the infrastructure of the variety of towns in India, the amount of jati that was needed to be created in order to serve all of these people and make them part of the caste system and thus part of proper society increases, okay? So obviously as trade and manufacturing increases, as the amount of jobs increases, the amount of jati increases, which are the subdivisions within the varna, the colors, the castes themselves of the caste system, right? And these people want to be part of the caste system because that's the only way you're going to be properly respected, okay? You would say this in much of South Asia during this time, okay? So thus, what the increase of trade and manufacturing really does is continue to establish the caste system as the society of South Asia. There is a direct relationship between the idea of good economic times and the sort of indoctrination, the further indoctrination of the caste system within South Asia, within India. Okay, so that's the relationship I am looking for in that particular answer and something you should be aware of. Number 2, how did early Buddhism evolve into Mahayana Buddhism? How did it help spread the religion? Well, obviously, early Buddhism evolved because obviously Buddhism was into attracting people. You don't loosen up your standards unless you want to attract people. And that's what they did with Mahayana Buddhism. They made Buddha into a god. So now they create statues in honor of him. You go to certain shrines and you pray to him, etc., etc. You've got your Bodhisattva. I mentioned that famous Steely Dan song. YouTube it, by the way, and then you can listen and dance as you listen to this. Anyways. Bodhisattvas, the idea of, some type of angel, sort of the Buddhist angel coming down and assisting you up to nirvana. The idea of creating certain types of monastic organizations that provide a great deal of social services. Social services are people always want something. Don't you want to receive a free hand or free help, something like that? Everybody always does. Everybody wants assistance, right? And that's obviously going to lead to it spreading as well. I think that provides good reasons. Obviously, pilgrimage sites, educational institutions. So now we're combining the educational institutions is actually going to help spread the religion big time into China. Why? Because Buddhism already created these educational institutions within India and heading up north and then further east, the Confucian system is going to blend with the Buddhist system, especially when it comes to education, all right, and leading yourself a disciplined life, as Confucianism also advises on. Okay, I think it provides with good enough answers. Let's head back to where we were last class, which is we ended last class with the death of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered, and you can take a look at maps, and I advise you to do so, by the way, to look at maps throughout the entire course. On the menu, I am going to be providing links to a variety of sites that would provide you with assistance as to which maps and et cetera, that I would recommend, etc. But keep this in mind. Looking at a map is important because you get a sheer sense of the amount of territory that certain empires were built upon. And one of the greatest empires the world has ever known was Alexander's empire, which went all the way from Egypt and into parts of Europe, obviously, and Greece and stuff like that. I should say Greece and parts of Europe, all the way through crossing the Indus River. That's it's an enormous amount of landmass. I don't want to give percentages about what percentage of the civilized world he had conquered, but it was quite a lot, okay? Now that he's dead, all right, there is no leader atop, what's going to happen to his empire? And what they did is they created, and I mean certain, people, I don't know who they are, but there were 3 empires created, and these are called the Hellenistic Empires, Hellenistic. Let's take a look at this Hellenistic. What Hellas, or something like that, Hellens, that basically refers to the Greek-speaking world. So thus, the Hellenistic empires refers to the Greek-speaking world in terms of these 3 areas. Let me break it down for you, these 3 ones. The first is called Antigonid. the Antigonid Empire, Antigonid. The Antigonid Empire is located in Greece and Macedon. But there was always a good deal of conflict between the Antigonid rulers, who were, Macedonian, and the Greek city-states that are further below. All right? But something which did occur during this period of time, the next several hundred years, is that Athens and another city by the name of Corinth, they're really beginning to flourish due to trade during this time, because there is stability now. Next, Ptolemaic. The P is silent. Maybe you've heard it with a P, Ptolemaic. I always just said Ptolemaic, P-T-O-L-E-M as in Michael, A-I-C Empire. The Ptolemaic Empire is Egypt, and it is by far the wealthiest. And it's during this time that a city is built in honor of the fallen leader, Alexandria. And it becomes the world's greatest and most cosmopolitan city. Alexandria back then was known even then for its museum and for its libraries and for it's basically the cultural center of the world, okay? Alexandria is located at the mouth of the Nile, and that's a Ptolemaic Empire. Typically, rulers, they got along well with the locals because they didn't interfere much within Egyptian society. So Ptolemaic society, very stable, very keen, very good. The final of the three is the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid, S-E-L-E-U-C-I-D, S-E-L-E-U-C-I-D Empire. And this one, by far, in terms of landmass, is the greatest. It goes all the way from Bactria, which, remember, we talked about Bactria in the northwestern corner of India, but also including Pakistan and Afghanistan, modern day, all the way to Anatolia, which I've said many times again. Anatolia is Turkey minus, you would say, Istanbul, plus a little bit of the land in the Central Asian Stan states today. Okay? Like the rest of the Hellenistic world, it's very influenced by Greece, the Greece culture, the Mediterranean style society during that time. And as we spoke about in Chapter 9, however, Bactria, the area that's furthest east in the Seleucid Empire, ends up retreating from the Hellenistic Empire and forms its own control center around the Indus River in Bactria, etc. Okay? And that's the Hellenistic Empire, is what you need to know. Now we got to go in a different direction in Greece, and that is all about the fruits of trade, dealing with the Greek economy and the Greek society. Okay? As we know, as population grows, and during this time in Greece, production and trade is very good. Olive oil, wine. These are the qualities, these are some of the special, you should say, qualities that Greece has that it can export and make a great deal of money from other people, okay? What is Greece lacking? Well, think of Greece in of itself. Greece is a mountainous country, okay? What this means is that communities are typically not going to be self-sufficient, and thus there is a need always for a certain amount of trade back and forth. Certain commodities like grain, are not the easiest things to come by, or are not, they need to import grain from other areas in order to feed its people. Point blank. That's what I'm trying to say. Many Greek towns and cities would create an agora, A-G-O-R-A. And an agora is this big open space within town that served as the central locale for marketplaces and other types of, commerce and interactions between people. Agora within a Greek town. As we know, because of the fact that trade was such a huge part of the community, obviously then, because you've established these good relationships with people in other city-states, you're going to want to create some type of social events with them. And this is where stuff like the Olympics comes from. O-L-Y-M-P-I-C-S, Olympics. Well, you know how to spell Olympics. In fact, originally, the Olympics were part of something called the Pan-Hellenic festivals. And think of it, Pan-Hellenic, pan across all of, and Hellenic refers to the Greek-speaking world. So Pan-Hellenic refers to the events throughout the entire Greek-speaking world, that of the Hellenistic empires. And one of the Pan-Hellenic festivals were the Olympics. All right, let's move on. Typically, when the Greek people are covered in literature, oftentimes the stereotype is to refer back to Homer's world. And remember Homer. Homer, of course, the man who is given credit for writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. Some people say that the Iliad and Odyssey, how could they be written by the same people? Because the Iliad is more of this sort of tragic, it's in a very tragic form, and it's about war and military, whereas the Odyssey is very, very different. It's this sort of entertainment spectacle, an adventure, where a lot of it's based on the cleverness or cunningness or the strength of character of its characters. Just a little bit, they're different tone poems, all right? But Homer carries and talks about the Greek people in terms of the men being very heroic and and the women being very outspoken, and just always these, it seems like these large, big tempers that sometimes now we classify as being these Latin personalities, okay? In Homer's world, strong-willed human beings are always clashing, and that's just something that's just part of life. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but like most other societies, it was patriarchal, all right? The man is very much in charge. The women in Greece typically could not own landed property, all right? However, women could operate small businesses, but again, property was in the hands of men. In fact, the only public position for women was that of a priestess, And again, as I spoke about last class, Spartan women typically had higher social status than that of the women in the other city-states. So if you're a woman and you want equality, head to Sparta, but you better be tough, because that's gonna be a big part of your life. Something very funny about Greek society that is part of this class. I don't know how often it ends up on tests, but I'm going to share this information with you because you are a high school student and thus mature enough to know about stuff like this. And that is the idea of homosexuality throughout Greece. Okay? We're going to talk about it in terms of men in a moment when we get to Socrates. But in terms of women, there was a very famous female poet by the name of Sappho, S-A-P-P-H-O, and today lesbian activities are looked at as sapphic activities. And Sappho was this very famous tutor who instructed young women in music and God only knows what else. And apparently she was guilty of also seducing quite a few of them, okay? She got herself into trouble, which is kind of hypocritical considering the copious amount of homosexual activity that was occurring between men. One other fact for you, I know you've always wanted to know this, but Sappho, S-A-P-P-H-O, was from an Ionic island. Ionic, remember, two types of Greeks, Dorian and Ionian. She was from an Ionic island by the name of, guess, Lesbos, L-E-S-B-O-S. And now you know why the term lesbian, Sappho. I'm so happy I'm able to share this with you, really. I mean, it's what AP World History is all about. Anyways. And one other thing about society, and that I said last class was to talk about it, is slavery. Slavery is a huge business in especially Athens. Slaves back then were looked upon as being chattel, C-H-A-T-T-E-L. Chattel is property. So thus, slaves are property of their owner. Slave can hold any type of position that the master wants the slave to hold. Some slaves were educators, some slaves were businessmen, some slaves were craftsmen. They were all different types. Obviously, a great deal of them as well were sort of, low people as well. Slavery, a big part of Athens, and one of the reasons why Athens society could later crumble a little bit because of the inequity, which we're going to see later in Rome especially. But now it's time for us to get to the cultural life of classical Greece, because one of the things that that's still so influential about Greece is the variety of cultures that came from it, and none may be bigger than the idea of rational thought and philosophy. Okay? Greek philosophy is based on the idea of reason. It's based on the idea of reason. Okay? Obviously, a great deal of it stems from, this individual is given credit, and that's Socrates. Socrates lived in between 470 and 399 BCE. And of course, he of the famous quote, "An unexamined life is not worth living." All right? Socrates was not a writer. So we have no idea, everything that we know about Socrates comes from one of his most famous students who we're going to get to in just a moment. But what we do know about Socrates is that he held these forums upon which he would educate people through a series of dialogues in which he would ask a variety of students a question and they would answer, and he would then frame their answer in a different question, and it was just, that was the way that they did things back then, okay? Unfortunately, Socrates was put to death for corrupting young men. He probably engaged in quite a bit of homosexual activity as well. Homosexual activity in Greece was quite common. Why? Because the idea of having a young man There was very much a, you could say, May-December romances, where there would be an older man who would, get into a relationship with a younger man, and it would serve as kind of an apprenticeship in a certain sense, where they would share a great deal together, not just romance, but education, certain skills, way one should lead one's life, etc., etc. And Socrates, I guess, was guilty of that with too many people, or maybe he was too old, considering he was 71 when he died, and hey, what can I say? Anyways. Let's see here. Next person, his student. Famous student, of course, we all know Plato. Plato was a prolific writer, and he wrote everything we know about Socrates, or we hear about Socrates, comes from the writing of Plato, comes from the writings of Plato. He was a very zealous disciple of Socrates. He lived a long time. He lived from 430 to 347 BCE. Now, Plato had a very specific type of idea, okay? Plato's idea are called the theory of forms or ideas, okay? Basically what he says is that each characteristic we know, like let's say virtue or honesty, has its subjective reality in this world or in our mind, but it also has a true reality, an objective reality onto its own, and that's this world of forms, okay? Plato is sometimes called, he gets in a Platonic idealism, which really is realism in a certain sense. All right, realism in that there is a separate objective reality for each characteristic that exists. Okay, this stands quite in contrast to people of the past. The philosophers of the Greek past included sophists. S-O-P-H-I-S-T-S. Okay, sophists say that experience determines what we know. What we know is based on our experience, whereas Plato is saying, well, there's something else outside of experience that we should try to appeal or achieve for. So these two different groups have different bends. Okay? According to Plato, this world we live in is an imperfect world of forms. Okay? Something else Plato is known for is his famous book, The Republic. The Republic expresses his ideal world where philosophers are also the kings. However, although you hear words like ideal and you hear words like republic, the Republic may not be a place that I personally would want to live. It hated the idea of art, hated the idea of poetry and theater, because he felt that Plato felt like those served as distractions to the people. So when you read through the Republic, you may think, goodness, he wanted to create a bit of a fascist state, but that's just all subjective opinion, right? It's all any individual can offer. Anyways, that's Plato. That is Plato. Let's now move to one of Plato's most famous students, and someone who is so extremely influential throughout the next 1,000, 1,500 years, not only in philosophy, but especially in religion, and that is Aristotle, and also mathematics and logic, Aristotle. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BCE. He was Plato's student, but he very much distrusted Plato's school of forms. Okay? Instead, Aristotle is very much into the notion of logic and observation. Observation, and then use logic or intuition or your rational mind to construct powerful arguments. Okay? He says that actions are based on the result they produce. Actions are based on the result they produce, and this leads into notions of natural law, which become very important with philosophers like John Locke as we approach the Enlightenment. Unfortunately, one mistake that Aristotle made, and his buddy Ptolemy made it to Ptolemy, was that both of them were geocentrists. Both of them believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. That's simply not true. But that was what people thought for the next 1,800 years. And that includes not just the common everyday people, but that's also what the Catholic Church preached. All right? And which is why people like Copernicus and Galileo had so many problems with the Church, was that the Church basically had to say, oh, we were wrong. And that's not the easiest thing for the Church to do, because then people are going to have less faith in what they're being taught by the Church. Aristotle, again, he was incorrect on that particular notion. Okay? However, his ideas of logic and rational thought are very influential to both Islamic and Christian statesmen of the future, and we're going to be mentioning about those influences a little bit later on. Okay? So again, Greek philosophy, definitely the intellectual authority for Europe, for the Islamic world, even outside, even certain people in Far Eastern China and South Asia as well, up until around the 17th century and the advent of the Enlightenment. All right, let's move on. We now have the popular religions and Greek drama. Okay? First, let's go into the religion. We know about the Greek deities. Zeus and all of the people beneath him, Zeus, and then we've got the variety of, Athena, and we've got Venus, and we've got, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not that I don't remember them, my mind is somewhere else. Anyways, so we have those. We also have lots of certain types of religious cults. And one of these religious cults where people like to pray to is the god of wine, the cult of Dionysos. And what happened was people, good time people, they would go out into the forest and they would have maybe too much fun and they would drink a lot and they would throw these great parties, right? But something else that they would produce is they would produce different types of theater. And eventually this theater gets exported in a more sort of PG form, and it's placed in cities. And this is the creation of Greek theater, drama, and the ideas of tragedy and comedy. Now, what is tragedy? Tragedy, in its essence, explores the possibilities and the limitations of human action, whereas comedy, in its pure form, was determined to lampoon or make fun of public figures. Hellenistic philosophy, Hellenistic religion. Hellenistic, remember, the continuation of Greek culture. The Hellenistic philosophers, broken down into three groups of people. The first are called Epicureans. Epicureans. E-P-I-C-U-R-E-A-N-S. Epicureans identify pleasure as the greatest good. Okay? So as long as you're behaving, you're not doing anything destructive or immoral towards people, you should always look to do what will please you. Doesn't sound too bad. Anyways, the second group are called the Skeptics. S-K-E-P-T-I-C-S. Obviously, skeptic, skeptical, doubting the certainty of anything. And that could be a little bit of a cynical type of thing. The most popular of the Hellenistic philosophies were the Stoics. S-T-O-I-C-S, the Stoics. And the Stoics, they basically taught individuals that their duty is to aid others and to lead a virtuous life and to provide for society. The Stoic philosophy of the Hellenistic period is very influential towards Rome in particular. Famous Roman statesmen like Cicero were proud to call themselves Stoics from the Hellenistic time. In terms of religions during Hellenistic era, as we go on throughout and we're going towards the turn of the millennium, there are a great deal of religions of salvation that are sort of popping up, okay? What becomes big is something called mystery religions. And mystery religions is going to be a big deal when we come to Rome as well. We're going to talk about it then, mystery religions. And certain speculation is beginning to appear, whether it be influenced by the Jews, that perhaps there's only a single universal God. And with that in mind, let us now go a little bit to the west on the Mediterranean and let's hit the country of Italy and talk about Rome. Okay, Rome. Rome, obviously, when we talk about the Roman Empire, we're talking really about Italy. We don't really need to know a great deal about, how people get into Italy and the groups that are there before the Romans. Where Roman history really begins in world history is with the Etruscans. E-T-R-U-S-C-A-N-S. Etruscans are town dwellers. They're trade and manufacturing people, and they have a language that's very close to Greek. All right, and they have settled around in the Italian area, a little bit near the Tiber River, T-I-B-E-R River, which is where the city of Rome is on. The story about the founding of Rome is that there were these two twins by the name of Romulus and Remus, R-O-M-U-L-U-S, and Remus, R-E-M-U-S, who were rescued by a she-wolf. And, Romulus ends up founding the city of Rome. Now, to be a citizen of Rome, why do I say citizen? Because as we know, Rome was a republic. Rome is a republic, okay? The last king, I know I talked about how to be a citizen in Rome. I'm going to get back to that in just a moment, okay? But the last Etruscan king, and they had kings back then, was deposed in 509 BCE. And a constitution was created, this Republican Constitution. The Republican Constitution created two basic, you would say, almost presidents. In Roman Republic, these presidents are called consuls. C-O-N-S-U-L-S. These presidents or consuls, there was one in charge of the civil, people in the civil community, and one president for the military. These two consuls, okay? Now, the consuls, these presidents, are elected by an assembly. And this assembly is very much dominated by the aristocracy. The aristocracy in Rome is called the Patricians. Patricians, P-A-T-R-I-C-I-A-N-S. Okay? Patricians, who makes up the patricians? Well, the patricians are those individuals who own enormous estates and are obviously very wealthy and old money. Another group of patricians that increase their power over time are called the equestrians. Equestrians. Did I say equestrians? Equestrians. E-Q-U-E-S-T-R-I-A-N-S. Equestrians. Equestrians are merchants and purveyors and other military contractors who organize imperial expansion, and because they're connected with that idea, they're obviously making a lot of money when it comes to the spoils and plunders of war. Now, who does the consul, this president, turn to for assistance? A great deal of that is towards the Senate. The Senate. The Senate advises the consuls and it ratifies major decisions. Now, who is the Senate? Well, the Senate is made up again of patricians. Patricians who are elected from a variety of regions or a variety of districts within Rome, etc. All right? Now, keep in mind then, the Senate and the consuls represent the interests of the aristocracy. Now, how do you become a citizen of Rome? You become a citizen of Rome from A, being from Rome, or from being a nearby town. If you are not geographically close to Rome, then you can never be a Roman citizen unless you move to Rome and you know certain people. All right? However, as the Roman Empire grows and expands, people and regions are given status of municipalities. Municipalities. M-U-N-I-C-I-P-A-L-I-T-I-E-S. Municipalities basically means that you don't have the right to vote in Roman elections, but you can marry a Roman and trade with a Roman. Okay? So it gives you certain rights except no voting. No voting. As you imagine by now, not only are these people upset they don't get any voting, but also think of the people who are not members of the aristocracy. Think of people who are part of the lower classes. And this is the majority of people, of course, the commoners. All right? The commoners are not being heard enough within governments, and they feel like policies are always benefiting one small group of people. These commoners are called plebeians. P-L-E-B-E-I-A-N-S. Plebeians. Okay? After a period of time, the aristocracy realizes and understands that we need to somehow satisfy the plebeians, and they give them something called the tribunes. T-R-I-B-U-N-E-S. The tribunes are what the plebeians have in order to participate in government, and their power allows them to intervene with the Senate and also veto decisions made by the consul. Now, the plebeians do actually dominate Roman politics for a period of time in the early 3rd century BCE. Unfortunately, though, as the Roman Empire expands and gets even larger, these freedoms are going to be cut down a little bit. And this is going to lead to the first of a series of civil wars that break out in Rome before the creation of the great Roman Empire. And it's these subjects and topics that we're going to be talking about next class. But for now, it is my turn to ask you a question. Well, of course it's my turn because I'm the only one speaking, but I mean it's my job, and it's also the time now to ask questions. And here's what they are. From Greece, and these questions deal with Greece. Compare and contrast Sparta and Athens. What was the legacy of the empire of Alexander? And trace the development of Greek philosophical thought from Socrates through Hellenistic times. Again, compare and contrast Sparta and Athens. What was the legacy of the empire of Alexander? And trace the development of Greek philosophical thought from Socrates through Hellenistic times. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was a good class for you and hope you learned a lot and wrote down a lot of information. And I will see you next one. Bye.